Well, let's get week 6 started. Dorian, kick off the introduction.
So, welcome to the virtual workshop, Profit and Love. Today's topic is navigating challenges. For those that don't know me, my name is Dorian Cunion. I'm an executive coach and small business consultant with Your Path Coaching and Consultant. And I'm pretty excited to have my co-host joining me today. Madeline, you want to kind of tell a little bit about yourself?
Yes, thank you. My name is Madeline McMahon. I am a fractional marketing strategist, and I specialize in working with small business teams or founders in startup phase to develop a marketing strategy based on what you've got going on and what you can afford. And I am so excited for this topic. Thank you to everyone who's joined us along the ride. If this is your first time joining us, we do record these, so they will be available to watch later. If you're watching this later, thank you so much for joining us that way. Week 6, we're going to talk about navigating challenges, turning conflict into opportunity. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like this has been a topic that we've both been looking forward to since before we even started this process. This has definitely
Yeah.
been the one that we've been building towards, and I know we're both really looking forward to talking about this.
For sure. All of the weeks of this has been based off the Power Six program. And when I was first introduced to the Power Six program, the section that just jumped out to me the most was the navigating challenges. And this past week, I actually paused and I've been telling people I had never really thought about navigating challenges. What I realized is I just didn't have the language for it. So during my time at 7-Eleven, a lot of the training that I underwent was around like how do you proactively prepare for conflict and what do you do when conflict arises. But now, because of the Power Six program, I actually have language around it. I can explain it better. And I think that's part of the training of part of the power of going through any kind of training or coaching is when you have the language to better articulate what you're trying to accomplish, it just makes you so much more effective.
Yeah, absolutely. When I looked through the different topics of the weeks and what we were going to cover in our series, the first thing that came to mind for me in navigating challenges and thinking of conflict, it actually took me back to when I was working in property management. I was working for a fairly large company managing an apartment complex in Virginia. And I was working in a community of lots of different apartment complexes, and our regional manager at the time actually pulled us all together and had us read a book that is called Supportive Accountability. And I found myself reflecting back on that time and reflecting back on reading Supportive Accountability. And in preparing for this call, I realized that the reason I make that association is recognizing that my leader saw we were struggling as a group with implementing disciplinary action or in supporting some of those disciplinary actions that had come into play. And it was really powerful to read through the book and get kind of recalibrated on not only how I was articulating, but how people were receiving the information that I was giving in some of those disciplinary actions. So I was very interesting to think conflict and
Yeah.
go to supportive accountability.
So supportive accountability, I haven't read that book yet. That concept seems like really good because at the end of the day, a lot of people think about accountability and oh, I got to be super tough and I have to be super strong. And reality is the best type and the first type of accountability should be very compassionate. It should be, I care about your success. I want you to be successful. What do you need from me? How can we work better together? So tell me a little bit more about, the book and how you were able to implement it within, your work.
I'll be a little vulnerable in this and transparent in that I found myself at first thinking I knew what I was going to be reading, thinking I knew the chapters and that I had an understanding of that. But what I found in actually going through the independent chapters was reading the case studies that actually show an example of implementing was what gave me more perspective on my employees' experience with my supportive accountability. It helped me imagine situations that would be relative versus just these case studies in the book. And so I found that reading through examples of an employee's experience were really interesting for shining light on how different the conversation could be.
That makes a lot of sense to me. A lot of times when I'm developing workshops, I try to weave in case studies because I find that people relate to stories. Some of my favorite business books are allegories. And whenever someone can kind of envision a real life situation and explore, like, how do you show up the best way during that situation, I think that it provides a lot of power, a lot of training, and provides you a little bit of a blueprint on, hey, I want to take these things and apply them, and then this I would do a little bit differently, but it gives you a lot of clarity.
And I think maybe a little humility too, in that not just knowing the structure of accountability, but seeing kind of that iteration based on someone's experience. So, is there an example that comes to mind for you of identifying conflict and kind of an example of navigating that
Yeah.
challenge?
There's a couple that come to mind. And what was super interesting this past week, I did a blog all around navigating conflict. And as I was writing it, it was writing it specifically about a situation with a franchisee where we had an employee that had stolen some money and they weren't ringing sales and it was a problem. And as I was reflecting on the situation, I realized that that was the first time I had to deal with that situation, and it actually built my muscles for dealing with conflict. But over the course of my career, I became very good with dealing with conflict because there was frequently situations where there was a problem, we had to address the problem, and it was really important for me as a leader to get comfortable with, being both direct and compassionate with people as far as finding solutions.
Now, I'm going to put you on the spot. That seems like uh, for lack of a better term, an obvious example of conflict. Someone theft, that seems like a really strong, we know that there's conflict there. Can you give a more subtle example or something that is maybe not as black and white conflict?
So the approach that you use for all conflicts are pretty much the same. Your comfort with addressing some issues are a little bit easier. If somebody in that situation, somebody stole $20,000 and it was like, we got to do something, there was a lot of urgency. I find that when it's behavioral issues, that is not a direct financial impact, but it's more of a relationship impact. People tend to struggle a little bit more with, having those conversations. And, one situation that comes to mind when I was a market manager with 7-Eleven, I had this one employee and he was brilliant. He was, one of the smartest people that I ever worked with. I continue to have a relationship with him today. But I was his boss, and he would always show up to meetings like 5 or 10 minutes late. And for him, he was just like, it's 5 minutes, it's not a big deal. But the team felt like it was disrespectful. It was always like an inconvenience because we'd have to, bring them up to speed with what we were talking about. So that was a situation where it was really challenging for me because this was a top performer, somebody that I felt like was high potential, but his behavior was having a negative impact on the team overall.
Wow, that actually makes me think of an example, kind of taking it back to property management and also kind of thinking back to last week and the impact of delegating. So, an instance of a time that I was navigating a challenge was I had a senior individual in a department kind of feeling lackluster about some of our SOPs and not seeing the value in doing these daily checklists
Yep.
because he knew the work was done. Why did he need to fill out that form? But the frustration for me was seeing that that was influencing others within the department. So, thinking back to delegating, how important is it for your business owners and your decision makers to understand how to navigate challenges ahead of that delegating because they may be navigating challenges through that delegation as well?
Yeah, I think that that's one of the biggest challenges as businesses grow from being very small operations to large operations. Because the reality is, and I know you know this yourself, an individual that's doing things their own way and they're not connected to anybody else can be really effective. because, things like naming conventions, the cadence of when they're doing things, they're designed personally for them to optimize their work. But when you start working with other people, decisions around like just how we save names of documents, where we store
Mm,
information, um, how we communicate. I recently had a one of my business owners reach out and say they had an employee that was complaining because over the weekend they were sending, Slack messages, and the employee was like,
mm.
"Hey, can you just send emails?" And it's like one of those things that the more people that you have involved in a situation, the more preferences there are. And the only way to optimize the actual team's performance is to get some alignment as far as this is the way that we're going to do things here. There's going to be some things that are negotiable, but you got to have some things that are non-negotiable. And it's your job as the boss to hold that accountability and make sure that people are sticking to the plan that everybody's agreed to.
That makes me think of a question. I can't help but think about generations and how people perceive things differently in our workforce across multiple different generations right now. So, what advice do you have for navigating conflict in a disconnect in those systems and those processes? Maybe Slack doesn't make sense, but the other person doesn't want emails. Like, how do you navigate that as conflict when there are different tools preferred by different personality types or generations in your office?
I love that question because I frequently hear from people that say, "Oh, it's so hard to work with people that are in their 20s." And when I think back to when I was in my 20s, I probably was hard to work with also. Younger people, they have a lot of ideas. They don't necessarily understand how things work. They want to understand how things work. So they're constantly going to be asking questions. And I think that this is something that happens now as much as 100 years ago. I think the big difference is that 100 years ago, that it was kind of agreed, like that's not acceptable. Like you're a new
Mm,
employee, you just have to go with the flow. So pretty quickly into
etiquette.
that employee experience, it's like we can't do that. What's different now is you have leaders, and the leaders talk about, we're an inclusive environment. We care what you think. We want you to love your job. So the leaders are actually projecting, hey, this is an environment where you can ask questions, where you can challenge the status quo. And that's really important because the reality is that, you know, a 20-year-old probably going to understand social media and AI better than a 50-year-old. So we need those new ideas. We need to evolve. But we also need to be clear around when is it appropriate and how do you best ask questions or challenge the status quo? Because if there's not clarity, then it's almost like we're dancing and you're stepping on my feet. Well, if we could just back up a little bit and have some rules around how we're moving, then all of a sudden we can dance, we can have fun, and we can get some things done.
So, and it seems like it would be incredibly important in that team development too. You don't want to get to a point where you've onboarded everyone and then you see that not everyone is using the
Yeah.
same tools or has that conflict. So, how do you build towards um, learning from current experiences in a way you don't have to navigate the same challenges over and over again?
One of the things that I encourage small business owners to do is define your non-negotiables. There are certain things that is like, I am not going to budge. It doesn't matter how much you talk to me. It doesn't matter how many facts you provide. This is the way that it is. Take the time to document those. When you onboard a new employee, let them know, like, these are the non-negotiables. And also, another thing I encourage people to share, these are my pet peeves. If you can teach
Interesting.
people how to manage you, then your life can be easier. Now that they kind of understand, okay, these are the things that they have, my boss is really hard on. These are the things that he really just doesn't like. Then they have room to say, okay, these are some things that are negotiable. These are some things that I can have a
Mm,
conversation. And ultimately, you're empowering the employee because if you're transparent about this is the way things are, then the employee can say, I can sign up for that. I'm going to learn how to deal with it. Or they can say, you know what, this is not the type of environment for me. I want to go someplace else. And then you're not wasting a whole lot of time.
mm. So the example that I gave earlier, I was working for a very large company, much more in that kind of corporate mindset. So expectations and tools and resources were often provided to me. And then the expectation would be that I had that supportive accountability in
Yeah.
implementing those tools. And you've mentioned 7-Eleven, where I have to imagine there
Yeah.
were standards and things you had to follow. What do you suggest for someone who has started their own business or their own company that doesn't have those corporate tools? How does someone figure out how to label these non-negotiables
Yeah.
or outline the accountability if they find that someone is not meeting expectations?
So there's a lot of ways that you can learn. You can learn by reading books. So library is full of resources on how to be a good manager, how to delegate, how to hold accountability. You can start there. Another place you can start is through networking. There's tons of small business owners that enjoy mentoring and passing on, generational knowledge to the next group of business owners. So, if you don't like to read, don't want to read, or you just want a little bit of a mix, go ahead, find a mentor, find some advisors that can guide you. If you find
I
that
love that.
those two aren't quite enough, then I'd encourage you to start looking for workshops and trainings. There's tons of workshops and trainings out there. It sounds like read a book, went through a training when you were part of a corporation. When I was at 7-Eleven, they sent us to a lot of leadership trainings, and that helped me to level up my ability to lead. So trainings are kind of the lowest cost, highest yield thing you can do as far as spending money. And then the last one I would say is hiring a coach or an expert, because the reality is uh, there's only so much you can learn and grow on your own without having a master that's really working with you. So I would say grow as much as you can off of free or low cost things. And then once you hit a wall, go ahead and bring in a leadership coach, project management coach to kind of help you with going to that next level.
What about a tool that someone could use for kind of metrics for measuring navigating challenges? Is there a framework or something that someone could use right now to kind of outline how to navigate a challenge with an employee?
Yeah. One thing that you've done a really good job over the course of these calls is challenging me to take what's in my head and get it on the paper. So what I did over the last 2 weeks, I went back through all the different training materials that I've done, some of the different like articles that I've written on conflict resolution and conflict management, and put together a real simple like 2-page document that you can use to both prepare for a conversation and then actually document it afterwards.
That's
So
amazing. Yeah, if you want to show us an example. And I'd also love to know, as you walk us through that, what you do with that document if you find that you've had to fill it out.
Okay. So I know when we were planning this session, you mentioned that in your prior life, there was a pretty large HR team. And I know when I was with 7-Eleven, we couldn't terminate an employee if we didn't have proper documentation. So, the basis of this document is for the worst case scenario. If you have an employee that just chronically is not getting better and you have to terminate them, you want to make sure you have a good paper trail, and that if the employee tries to accuse you of unfair treatment and takes you to court over it, that you can justify, I did everything within my power to support this employee, to put them in a situation of success, and it just didn't work out, and that's why they're no longer with us. So with that context, this document, we start off with the date. If you're ever in front of a judge, and I had plenty of employees that had to go in front of judges and kind of justify, why someone didn't work there. Judges love to know, when did you have these conversations, and who was involved. So top of the document, uh, date of the conversation, the time period that was discussed. Are we talking about an issue that was just, last week, something that was over the last 3 months? Like, giving some clarity for the time period is helpful. And I think this is really important from an employee's perspective, because if you're the boss and you say, I've had this issue for the last 3 months and I don't feel like you're addressing it, that hits a little bit differently than last week you did something and I'm talking to you about it. So making sure the scope of the problem is agreed upon by both parties is super important. Generally, these conversations you just want to have you and the employee. If you do have an HR person, maybe they're involved. If there's, somebody else, but just documenting that is always good. So the next thing,
Especially if there's a witness,
yeah,
right? If
if
there's
there's
a
a
witness to
witness,
the
yep.
conversation. Yeah.
So the next part that you want to get into is a description of the problem. And what I love about this is before you go into a conversation, you need to be crystal clear as far as this is the problem that I want to solve for. By you filling this out ahead of time, when you actually get in front of that, employee, coworker, whoever it is, you can be crystal clear as far as, hey, today we're here to talk about this. This is what I've observed, and we need to kind of solve this. The next section is suggested improvements. So you as an individual, you have a lot of experience. Even before you get into this conversation, if you take the time to say, I think that we could resolve this by, and we'll use an example of somebody that's not showing up to work on time. I think that this could be resolved if you left earlier, if and you can kind of think about what are some different suggestions that you have, but having those outlined ahead of time can help you to ask better questions during the session and things of that nature. If there's any assistance that you can provide, thinking about that ahead of time and being willing, like, this is what I'm willing to do to help you. Now, as you go into the conversation, it's important to remember that there's two sides of this conflict, of this problem, and that they may have some suggestions for improvements. They may have some requests as far as assistance. They may have some things that they're willing to do. As you actually get into the conversation, it's good to have a back and forth. What ideas do you have for addressing this? Well, these are my ideas. What would you need from me? Well, this is what I'm willing to do. And that back and forth can help you find a resolution.
I love that. That is really powerful response from the other party. And I think that's an interesting component of accountability. And it makes me jump a little bit to the next question I was going to ask you, and how do we turn this conversation into an opportunity? So I love seeing response from other party as a part of this process. I think that's really powerful.
At the end of a conversation, you should be getting a commitment from the other party, and you should be willing to make a commitment from yourself on this is what's going to happen after this conversation. If you don't have a commitment, then it's really hard to find a resolution to the conflict. It's really hard to take any steps forward. So, we start with the problem and then we end with trying to get a commitment from both parties on what are we going to do to try to solve this problem.
So what advice do you have for someone? Not everybody's a good fit for every organization, for every process. So if you've gone through this and you've had the accountability, you've navigated the challenge, and you do have to let someone go, where's the opportunity in that? How can we reframe this so that we're still finding a positive in this exchange?
So one of the things that we talk about in the Power Six program is a good mentality. And that is really trying to find, what is the positive that's coming from any situation. And I know that, if you're firing somebody, it's tough, emotionally. There's a lot of guilt there. There's a lot of questioning. Have you done everything that you could do? Uh, but one thing is a reality. If somebody's not doing good at their job, they're likely not happy. And
Mm.
the good thing that can come from you holding the accountability is that you can help this person find something that's actually going to be the right fit for them, that they're going to enjoy, and that they're going to be successful in. So as a leader, it's up to you to choose how you're going to deal with it. Some people are ruthless and they just say, you're not getting the job done, and they fire people without much warning. Some people, and something that I advocate for, is treating people like humans, like being upfront, like you're not meeting expectations. This can't continue. I need you to improve or find an alternative solution for yourself so that it can be a win-win, because you being part of this team, not doing things to expectations is not a winning situation for me. And there has to be a time limit on how long you're going to allow um, the rest of the team and yourself as an individual being impacted by that employee that's not doing what they're supposed to be doing.
I'm really glad you brought that up, actually. Not a personal experience, but a story close to home that I've just been listening to is an example of an individual that had become toxic in a team environment. And it got to a point where the negative components of their contribution were much stronger than the unique skill set they were providing to the organization. So I can also see some opportunity in this, in that you are acknowledging things that are shortcomings, that you're listening to your team and implementing that discipline, and being proactive and severing ties if things don't make sense. So can you talk about this thought process and how it trickles down to even the hourly employees that some of our viewers and listeners might have?
Yeah, the way that I think about these things, the body, so the actual company has to be the most important thing because
Mm.
if the body's not healthy, then, the parts of the body aren't healthy. And it can be extremely challenging when you have an employee that you like, but that's a problem within the organization. When you're in that situation, you have to ask yourself, will keeping this person around do harm to the overall body? And if the answer is yes, then you got to find some medication. Hopefully you can provide something to help that person heal and get better so that they're not hurting the body. But if it comes down to this person staying and potentially killing the business, or you having to sever this person and help them find another opportunity, I think it's really advisable for you to have the courage and the compassion to like care not just about that one individual employee, but the team overall and the impact that that individual is having on the team.
So how much we've talked about, like, documenting for the business, for the health of the organization, things like that. Thinking about the leader of this conversation, and our managers or our owners, do you have any thoughts about any, like, personal journaling or professional journaling about your experiences through this? How do you suggest that people that are implementing these systems kind of reflect on what's working or not working as they go?
I think that's a great question. One of the things that 7-Eleven required all managers to have was an employee discussion journal.
Interesting.
Yeah. And in that, the whole thought process is that you had a page for each employee and you're supposed to be intentional about writing both the good things in there. Hey, they did a great job building a display. They were the number one person with sales, and then also the bad thing. What's easy to happen is for you to lose perspective, for somebody to do something horrible, and for you to forget all the good things that they did before. So having that journal, I found especially the managers that actually were diligent about keeping track of things kept it even keel, and also they were better at holding accountability because they could say, Jim, like we've had this conversation 8 times. Oh, you don't believe me? Well, I have an employee discussion journal. Every time we have this discussion, I write it down here. And I think it's time for us to stop having this conversation. What can I do to help you so that we don't have to have this conversation anymore?
Yeah, that's very powerful. And for a lot of different reasons, right? So, and this, I guess, so I think that you kind of touched on this earlier, but where can, I hear it's lonely to be a founder. It can
Yeah.
be tough to be the CEO. Where can people in that position reach out for camaraderie or to kind of update their expectations in navigating challenges? I mean, this is an ever changing world. We've got a lot of different things going on in just about every industry I can imagine. Where can someone who's responsible for making these choices and steering the ship find the best support today?
So if you're in the Richmond area, there's an organization that I joined a couple months ago called In Unison. It doesn't cost that much to join, and there's a lot of experienced business leaders. And I'm confident that every single city has these business focused organizations where you can build community with other individuals that are like yourself. If you look at the titans of industry, the Elon Musk and those types, all of them have a network of other large business owners that they interact with. They meet up, they share ideas, they talk about common challenges. If you're a solopreneur or a small business owner and you don't have a network of 5 business owners that you're touching base with once a month, you're doing yourself a disservice, because there's no way for you to stay up to date on all the latest trends. There's no way for you to think through all of the best ways of doing things. So if you have a strong network of other people that are doing similar work as you, then you're going to be able to tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, I have this problem. Have you dealt with this before? What guidance do you have? And you're not just relying on one person. You have a network of multiple people that can give you different perspectives to help you make the best decision possible.
I love that suggestion. That is really incredible, and encouraging people to find others that know things that they don't. And that I mean, it feels like challenges in themselves are evolving and changing on a day-to-day basis. So how can you keep track of everything? How can you make sure that you're doing what's appropriate and what's right? And not everyone has that human resources department or component that's telling them, okay, this is the update, you need to do XYZ. So I love the idea of having a network of 5 different business owners that you're speaking with every month. That makes me want you to start a cohort where you can help organize these clusters of people and have that accountability group and things. That I think that's great. Okay, so we are at week 6 of our workshop. We've talked about a lot of different topics. I would love to see you kind of help connect all the dots across. So you want to walk us through kind of the highlights of each component of the Power Six to tie this all in a bow for our viewers?
Oh, sure. So with the Power Six framework, we started off and we were talking about motivating team action. And the reality is that before you can hold any type of accountability, before you even get into a difficult conversation, you got to have clarity as far as why does your organization exist and why somebody should join it and how you guys are going to work together to achieve goals. Beyond that, once you have clarity as far as, this is who we are and this is what we do, then we spend a lot of time on trust, because we know that we're going to have a conflict at some point. All relationships have conflicts. If there's not trust, then that conflict is going to go sideways. But if you invest time up front to nurturing that psychological safety, making sure the person knows that you have their best interest at heart, when you have that difficult conversation where you say, look, I love you as a person, but you're not the right fit here. I'm going to help you find an organization that you can go to where you're going to be a better fit. That person knows that there's no malice in your heart, that you're really looking out for their best nature and you're trying to make sure that they're in a position of success. Once we have the trust established, then we can start to really dig into goals. And we want to be crystal clear on what success looks like, because if I hire you, Madeline, and I say, Madeline, right now I have 50 YouTube subscribers and I want to get to 1,000, then that gets you thinking, okay, what can we do to get you there? Well, without that clarity, you could be focusing on LinkedIn, you could be focusing on Facebook, but it's really important that we're super clear as far as this is the number one priority. These are the next 2 or 3 priorities, and we're really going to define success by achieving these. So that's all about like creating a culture of teamwork. After we have that culture of teamwork, it's all about maintaining momentum. So from a momentum standpoint, we spent time around decision making, because once I bring you in and I say this is the goal, then it's super important that I'm not micromanaging. You're talented, you have skills. I need to point you in the direction, say, these are the things you can do without having to touch base with me. These are the things that I'd really like you to touch base with me on before you move forward. And that gives people a lot of freedom to move fast and to be productive. Once we've aligned on decision making, then we get into, wait for it, delegation. The hardest thing for all people, just about everyone I work with. That's the thing that they struggle with the most. And I find that they struggle because they didn't invest the time in those other things. They weren't clear about what was important. They didn't define the goals. They didn't build trust. So they don't feel comfortable delegating. Once you delegate, hopefully you've done a good job assessing people's talent, putting them in a position of success. But every once in a while, there's going to be a conflict. But you need to be clear on when that conflict arises, this is how we're going to deal with it. And we're going to really look for co-prosperity where both of us are finding a win on the other side of the conflict.
I've loved this whole process. You've shared a lot of really incredible tools and resources, some of them your own, some of them free to everyone, some of them, programs and things like that. Do you have a favorite tool that you get to use throughout talking about the sequence or these 6 steps? Is there one tool or worksheet that stands out as being one that has the biggest impact on the people that you're working with?
I really think that the leader's intent has the biggest impact. And the reason why I think it has the biggest impact is it calls you to slow down and to actually define, like, why are we doing this? Like, why are we doing a virtual workshop? And then after that, you take the time to define, like, what is the end state? Once we're done doing this project, what should it look like? What's the impact that we want to have? And that, from a delegation standpoint, is just super important, because if people understand what you're trying to accomplish, then it's really easy for them to either bring the skills that they have or go get some new skills so that they can meet the expectation. The other thing that the leader's intent does is it calls for the leader to define, like, what are the guiding principles, what are their key requirements. And again, the more clarity that you provide, the more safety you create, the more comfort that you give with somebody to be able to just go out there and execute. So I really, like, it is my favoriteest tool. I encourage people to use it all the time. And there's a couple other tools that kind of go in conjunction with it that helps it to be even more effective. But if there was only one tool that somebody was going to use, I would tell them to use that, adopt that today.
Very cool. And I'm glad that you brought up our experiences and kind of our objectives in this. And something that I was really hoping is that people that I'm working with that tune in or watch this, before or after this process, will have a better understanding of what the options are,
Yeah.
and also empower themselves to take care of themselves as leaders first, to then set that example. It's something that has been a consistent theme over all of our conversations, is it's so important to know what you're trying to accomplish, what is important to you, to know your non-negotiables, and how impactful that is for your ability to be a good leader and your ability to delegate. It can be really difficult to delegate or release the reins or let go if you're not entirely sure what you're hoping will be accomplished, or if you don't have that confidence. So I'm hoping that people that work with me who watch this will do more research into resources available to better themselves as a leader, or to consider, maybe it's not a marketing strategist you need. Maybe it's a business coach. Maybe it's a systems and development process. I think that there are so many resources today that a business owner could find or invest in. And we've kind of got paralysis by analysis in these days. So I'm hoping that people will look at the tools and resources that you've offered and kind of better calibrate on who would be someone that can support you at this point in your journey with what you're trying to accomplish right now. And we're in a great time to be alive and be in business, that there are so many different types of coaches, and so many different types of fractional, and so many different types of freelance. So I guess I'd love to hear what you're hoping your viewers will learn most from this, but also, is there someone watching right now that you're hoping this will be their sign it's time to call you as a business coach?
Yeah, great question. When I started this year, I started with a blog that I was writing. And in the blog, I said, my goal is to make a meaningful impact on 100 business owners this year. Doing this virtual workshop is part of that. What I know is that business owners go through stages. And the first stage that everybody goes through is just consuming free content. So this is free content that's going to be able to get you started, give you enough resources to be able to start making a little bit more money, so that you can then start to figure out, where do I need some expertise to help me go to the next level? I have package myself as a generalist. There are people that know HR better than me. There's people that know marketing better than me. But if you are right at that point where you can't afford a team of 5 different people, but you need one person that can advise you and help guide you, I am that person. I can teach you the fundamentals that you need to know about those different segments of the business and help you grow to the point that you can afford to hire a Madeline to come in and take your marketing to the next level. That you can go ahead and bring in like a high cost financial advisor that can help you take your business to the next level. So I really see my expertise or my calling to take all of the knowledge and wisdom that I've accumulated over my 21 years with 7-Eleven, over my 3 years doing direct coaching and consulting now, to really help small business owners take their business to the next level. I believe in small business. I think it makes our society better. And I'm just honored that I get the opportunity to work with as many small business owners as I do and be able to make a meaningful impact on their businesses.
And this is just the tiniest shout out for anybody that's watching. I can confidently list at least 3 businesses that I know you've made a positive impact on, because we just recently watched a live pitch competition in Ashland, Virginia for small business owners. And I saw in real time what an incredible impact you made in helping some of those business owners to put their presentations together and give them the confidence that they needed to win some of that prize money that was available. So it was very cool to kind of see that in tandem with what we've been working on in our conversations, that live action case study of how impactful it can be to work with you. So I'm sure they appreciate you being there. It was definitely very cool to see how much they see that confidence on stage for the people that you worked with.
I believe that knowledge and confidence are 2 of the biggest barriers to most people's success. And they're interconnected because if you don't have knowledge, you can't really be confident because you're not competent. So I really see a big part of my role is helping people to get the knowledge that they need to be successful. And then if there is something with the mindset that's getting in the way of confidence, helping them to explore that, because if you show up like you deserve to be there, other people will believe you. So it's really important that you do your work, you develop your skills, but when you actually have that opportunity to win the contract, attract a new customer, that you're showing up as your full self and really showing people why they should work with you.
I love that. Okay, so we're wrapping up our time. Tell us how we can get in contact with you. Where can everybody find you? Drop your social channels, all that kind of stuff. What's the best way for someone to keep the conversation going with you?
Yeah, so if you are on Instagram, I'm your underscore executive coach. I don't know how that was still available, but I snagged it. So if you want me to be your executive coach, reach out to me. To find me on the internet is www.yourpathexecutivesolutions.com. We try to provide the best solutions for those that are trying to elevate into being executives. And then if you scan this QR code, you're going to be able to sign up for my newsletter. On the landing page, there's some free resources that you can immediately access to help you grow your business. And then each week, you'll get information to your inbox that will help you just elevate your business.
Awesome. Awesome. And you guys can find me on LinkedIn, Madeline R. McMahon. My email address is madeline@beerpaysthebills.com. Really more conversation starter than anything. But my shout out in this is going to be, if you're looking for someone like me, call your economic development. Find your local resources, start with the people in your neighborhood that can appreciate where you're coming from and want to support your business being in their jurisdiction, right? And if you're in Eastern Virginia and you're anywhere near Ashland, stop by, the DEIC drop-in coffee where you'll find me in Dorian, or, here's your sign to find that free networking event. Put yourself out there, take advantage of the free tools and resources that are available through sites like Your Path Coaching, and then lean in. Find your people, find your community, find your cheerleaders, lean in and hold yourself accountable in the process, right? There's a lot of resources out there that can help you connect those dots, whether you need to pay for them or you were looking for them for free.
So hopefully you've enjoyed this virtual workshop. If you started with number 6, go back and watch some of the earlier ones, and we'd love to hear your feedback. We're still trying to determine whether or not to follow this up with another series, and we'll definitely do it if we're hearing feedback from you as far as different topics that you'd like to hear more on.
And special thank you too to Dr. Rudy Jackson for joining us and for Haley Smith. We had a great time hosting different guests. So if not this virtual meetup, we may have to connect back with Power Up Productions in Ashland and see if we can do something in real life with Amy here in town.
For sure. And shout out to your interns, Justin Hayes and Raleigh Benecki. Really appreciate the support that you guys have been providing throughout this process.
Yes. Also, get an intern. They're awesome. They're great.
All right. Thank you all. Look forward to hearing from you.